Hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Luke.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Philip.
we didn't sort that out. You know, that could have been our fuck up. But you know, at least someone jumped in and went, you know what? I'm Luke. So yeah, good to have you all here. Hopefully everything is working out there in the internet world. I haven't been on the ball today. I do apologise. Have you guys been though?
Good, yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Been out for a lovely walk.
Oh yes, whereabouts? I mean, obviously I know Swindon, but where's lovely in Swindon?
Well, yeah, there's a place called Midget Park. We did one
Midget
lap
Park?
because Heather and Logan are doing a charity 5K, so we went and checked it out to see what their route was going to be.
Nice.
Which was good,
Yeah.
even if it was 26 degrees out, which, no.
It was rather warm today, although unfortunately we didn't actually have much time where it wasn't covered in clouds. The morning was like really bright and beautiful, and my mum actually came to visit us today with my sister. So we were like, yeah, let's go to the beach. We packed a little packed lunch as you do and all that sort of thing. We got down to the beach, clouds. So we stayed there for about 2-3 hours, and I mean it was still nice and warm, and in some respects it was good. Because it turns out that we ran out of all of our sun creams and there was only just enough left to do it. So it was good that there wasn't blaring sunlight. Otherwise, it could have been very burnt. But it was all in all a lovely day. What about you guys? You get up to much?
Work.
Ah, fun.
Studying assignment writing for me.
Yes, you did.
For my usual walk too. It was nice.
Oh,
your usual. How far is that?
Oh, that's about. I don't know actually. I have no idea. It's been a while since I last checked in how long it actually is. But I have like a little routine that I usually walk on.
Oh, nice. Hey, Shannon, nice to have you here. Apparently, she's here to hear some Loftus research based on the description.
Well, that's a spoiler, Shannon.
It hasn't really spoiled it because I'm still just as ignorant as to what that could mean. So, the benefit of being completely ignorant on the topic. Thankfully, there's one of us here who isn't completely ignorant on the topic who's going to be telling us about our topic tonight right now.
Who? Yeah. So, what do you want to start with, Joe? That's the question. Shall we start with the null hypothesis, or shall we start with the testimony stuff?
It depends. I mean, do you want your little null hypothesis rant first, or do you want to save it for the end?
If he gets it out now, he'll be less frustrated during the actual discussion.
That's true. That's
all right.
True.
Yeah,
go on then.
That's true.
Do it.
Okay, so first of all, let set the scene for me, Joe, because you're a very good storyteller. Set the scene for me. Why are we discussing this?
In a world. So, the null hypothesis is one of those things that is frequently quoted on the internet by some of our fellow atheists, and it's often said that atheism is the null hypothesis. And for anyone who actually has any inkling of what the null hypothesis is, that isn't exactly correct, is it, Luke?
No, because
I don't have any clue what it is.
That's good then. So it's not atheism.
Are we positive?
Yes.
So you're a positive atheist.
The reason the reason it gets mixed up, I think, is because people say, like, so for instance, so when somebody's born, they don't have a belief, and therefore they don't. The hypothesis of God they don't have, therefore we accept the null hypothesis, which is no God, and that's the default position that we take until we're proven otherwise in science. But that shows kind of it's it's just a misunderstanding of what null hypothesis is, because it's still a hypothesis. So you have to believe it. You have to accept it. You can't just say like you have to do a statistical test in order to analyze it, and then say, okay, the results show that this doesn't have any effect on this, and that's what it is. That's what the null means. Is that?
So just give us a basic example of a null hypothesis, a really simple one that we can all understand, because
chocolate has no effect on happiness,
right?
So that's a null hypothesis. So you're making a statement about the nature of the world, that chocolate doesn't have any effect on happiness. Now, when we're doing tests, what we're normally doing is trying to prove that chocolate does have an effect on happiness. Right?
And whether that's a positive effect or negative effect, it doesn't make any difference. But so the null hypothesis is literally just saying that it's not going to have any effect whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, and scientists want to find effects because they want to understand the world. So they want to see whether chocolate increases happiness or decreases happiness, right? But what they do is, in order to kind of take their bias out of the study, we always work from the null. Because then you're not trying to prove the thing that you want to prove. You're trying to falsify it. And if you're trying to prove it wrong, then and then it gets shown to be true, then that's when you know you've got an effect, right?
Yeah.
So it just takes your bias out of the situation, which is the idea of the null hypothesis. It's designed to falsify the study. So if you can't falsify it, then the study doesn't work.
So you can't actually
is just proving it wrong.
So you can't actually have a null hypothesis in something metaphysical like claims of gods, especially when you've got problems.
Because it's untestable.
Yes. So, I mean, if you were to actually say Sorry, 1 second, Chris. If you were just to say, like, God will move this glass, and it doesn't, then is that something that we can say is more testable in that regard? When you're actually making a claim about God and reality, and the effect that it is definitely a God, or is there any way you can sort of squeeze in the null hypothesis to that sort of thing?
So the way a hypothesis works is it's not just the... So let's take the chocolate and happiness thing. In order to actually test that, you need to operationalize it. And that means that you have to quantify what chocolate is, and you have to quantify what happiness is, because then you can test it. So if you're saying, like, God will move this glass, if you can't quantify what God is, then you can't test God, and therefore that hypothesis doesn't work.
Cool. Now that makes a lot of sense. Chris, what were you going to say there? Sorry.
I was just going to ask whether it is always to do with something not having an effect on something else.
Yeah, so the null hypothesis is just there to be like, it's not necessarily that's my experience, because a lot of psychology is about not having an effect, but it might be that we're not going to. So, for instance, gravitational waves thing. Yeah, the null hypothesis of that study where they had the big arms and stuff out, and they were trying to find gravitational waves. The null hypothesis is that this won't find gravitational waves. Yeah.
So if we were to accept a kind of broader view where we did apply it to metaphysical claims, so we could then possibly say something, instead of atheism being the null hypothesis, it would more be maybe that deism was. That the claim would be that God has an effect on the continual running of the world, but deism would be saying, well, no, God doesn't have an effect on the continual running of the world. Whereas atheism would be rejecting a God in the first place.
I think the issue comes into the testability of it. I think it's just a misappropriated term. It's a bit like when young Earth creationists say theory, and they're talking about like theory, like, oh, it's just a theory type theory rather than a scientific theory, which is lots of evidence to support it, and is essentially a fact.
So in this regard, Shannon's just chimed in and said that, H0, as in the null hypothesis, God isn't real, versus H1, God is real. It could easily be reversed, but it also so it's about defaults in mean comparisons, assuming a starting hypothesis. But what you're saying there is actually neither of those could technically be classed as a hypothesis because they're not testable unless you can.
Essentially, yeah.
So if you manage to define God and you manage to sort of conceptualize and form a test, then you could have that H0 and H1. But
absolutely.
the problem is we can't actually test it, so you don't even have a hypothesis. So you'd almost, in this regard God as just an idea, not even a hypothesis.
Precisely, yeah. So, and the other thing about the null hypothesis that we need to really think about is that it's barely ever. Scientists don't just accept nulls all the time, right? Because then they wouldn't do any science. They wouldn't have built a massive machine that was capable of finding gravitational waves if they didn't think that there was a potential for them to find gravitational waves, because they'd never experienced them before, because they accepted the null hypothesis. That just doesn't make any sense, right? So you have to, as a scientist, you have to be like, I need to figure out this thing in the world. Maybe there's gravitational waves. I don't know this is true. I'm gonna test it making this massive machine, right? That's not accepting the null necessarily. Until you test it, you can't accept the null or reject the null. And it is etiquette in science to accept the null hypothesis. Because you're not trying to prove yourself right. That is basically a humbling thing, rather than it being just like more of a skeptic thing where we don't believe things until they're proven true, or we believe things that aren't the case until they're proven true. So yeah, that's the null hypothesis. I don't know if that's cleared things up, but it's I think it's just a misappropriated term, and it just needs to be used clearer, because I think when people are using it, it's a bit like whenever we talk about these things about philosophy terms and scientific terms, it kind of gets mixed up and people think they're using it in a way that they're not.
Yeah,
and then it creates a misunderstanding within the field.
I think the reason that it comes out in this regard is because people think the word null, which is basically like nothing. So if you think about it in database terms, it's not even 1-0, it's null. It's something that's just not there. And that's how they go, well, there you go. That's what it means, because it's the not there hypothesis, rather than it being something that has no effect. And they're not even thinking about hypotheses as if they are an actual hypothesis. They're thinking about it in terms of it being an idea. And that's how this confusion has come about.
Yeah.
They're just using the colloquial version.
Yeah.
Well, they are exactly. But then they start saying that that's how scientists use it, and it's not. It's not.
No,
because
you
if
got a
scientists
3-day long
way,
conversation on that.
Yes, I did. I had a 3-day long conversation where somebody kept telling me that that's how scientists use it, and then I said no, they don't, and then they said, where did I say that they did? And I screenshot it and posted it to them, and they said, no, I didn't say that, and it's like. What is happening right now? Do you not understand? But it's not how scientists use it. And if you're going to use it, then I don't mind people using terms, but just be upfront about it. And if somebody says that's not how scientists use that term, and they understand the concept and they're teaching you the concept, don't try and tell them that they're wrong, because it's not going to work.
It's like you've mentioned before about how people tend to refer to psychopaths. They're and the psycho killer thing and all of that.
Conversation.
It was a really good conversation, but it's it's not the same thing as it would be done in psychology, and you find this in a lot of arenas, whether it's any form of science or philosophy or anything like that. People are somewhat removed from the terminology, and they're using colloquial versions, but a lot of your peers are using colloquial versions as well, and you don't realize that actually you're not using it how it would be done, at least in that context. In the same way that you can think about a creationist who thinks, well, evolution is just a changing kind and theory is just an idea. And because all their peers are saying the same thing, they all think they're right and everyone else is wrong, and scientists don't know what they're talking about, and so on and so forth. And it can happen to any one of us. We can get caught in these traps about absolutely anything. But before we go too far down that path and think about other things and common conversations that we get on, perhaps we should actually. Okay,
one
go
more
on.
thing,
Go on.
just on the null, because I think Philip will appreciate this as well. Actually, I think similar people that say that atheism is the null hypothesis also say that you can't prove a negative, and the null hypothesis is proving a negative.
Yeah.
You're showing something that's not. So just for anyone out there that says both of those things simultaneously, they are mutually exclusive. You cannot say that you can't prove a negative and then also say that the null hypothesis is a thing, because you are proving something doesn't exist or something doesn't affect something else. That is a negative. So
I've had so many arguments with people who tout that you can't prove a negative.
Yeah,
line.
that's so. Oh my god.
Yeah.
One of the worst.
Hate it.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, add, because there was this brief discussion on whether or not you God being a metaphysical thing, whether or not you can sort of test it or not. I think there are certain things, there was a recent conversation on Twitter that I followed for a while, on science being able to test certain things when it comes to God. And I think there's a very good case to be made that it is possible for certain things, like, for example, prayer, right? There have been studies on prayer.
Yeah,
and in these contexts, you could make, you could use all of this terminology because this is essentially statistical information, right? You could say, well, the null hypothesis in this case is that prayer doesn't have an effect, for example, I guess, on sort of recovery, maybe. And then you sort of try to... I'm sorry?
Prayer has been proven to have an effect on recovery, and it's not
it makes it worse.
I think we all know the study. I mean, there is this one study that is famous, at least. So yeah, I mean, there are things I think you could contextualize sort of parts of this into sort of a statistical framework where it would make sense, I guess, to talk about the null hypothesis. These are my thoughts.
Yeah,
I think I agree. I think it's maybe what needs to happen if we're going to test God, then we need to have a meta-analysis of all the different effects that we'd expect to see God have on the planet, and then form it into one research paper to kind of quantify God as a whole thing. But even then, I think there'd be a good argument for that's not testing God per se. That's testing something else. So. Yeah, it's
and that
difficult.
would also go back to what I was saying before about the null hypothesis being deism, not atheism. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. Cool. Shall we change the subject, Joe?
Yeah, no, we can. Although I was just having a look, and Peace and Wellseeker says, I know a study on prayer I recall with recovering heart attack patients has been shown to have an effect on recovery in a positive aspect, much more over the non-prayed for group. And to be honest, I think that could be right, because I don't actually think that there is necessarily any effect whatsoever. So I think it's just chance more than anything else. And the study that I read, and this is going back in time, was there were three groups. There was the group that weren't being prayed for. There was the group that were being prayed for but didn't know they were being prayed for. And there was the group that knew that they were being prayed for. And the people that knew they were being prayed for actually recovered worse, and the other two recovered at about the same rate. And I figured, well, maybe it's because they thought that God was going to help them heal, so they didn't have to fight themselves. Now, I'm sure there've been a ton of other studies on this matter, and I'm sure it's going to be a mixed bag of tricks, because I think a lot of it does just happen to be chance.
I always wondered if it might be an aspect of not necessarily thinking something else is going to be doing the work for you, but a degree of stress from essentially performance anxiety.
Yeah.
They're sat there expecting or watching people expecting them to get better faster, and that's heightening stress levels and making them recover slower.
That could indeed be, yeah. I hadn't thought of it like that.
A new study would have to control for it. Future research. Thinking like a psychologist now.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's get on to tonight's actual topic then.
Cool.
So the main focus of tonight's topic is testimony, but not purely testimony. We're going into things like memory, and actually at the very beginning of the stream, Peace and Wealth Seeker says, please can you address the Mandela effect and how that's just memory recalling being inaccurate.
I'll get to that.
I would love you to get to that as well.
Yeah, I was planning on getting to that. That's a spoiler. Peace and Wealth Seeker. So many spoilers today.
Well, you've just got an engaged audience, desperate to hear you speak.
Clearly, and now I'm nervous.
Don't worry, you don't need any performance anxiety. Just have a beer. But yeah, go on then, get on with it.
Right. I'm gonna start with a little test, right? So what we're gonna do? I'm gonna say some words, and I want you to remember as many of them as you can. Okay.
Can I write them down?
No, you can't write them down, and I'll come back to it later. Okay. Yeah, we're not gonna say them now, but we'll come back to them. So I'm just gonna say a bunch of words.
I'm dyslexic, right, and I have ADHD, so I've got really terrible short-term memory as it is. I don't find memory things fun at all.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And the people at home, you can join in with this as well. So don't write this down.
I know where you might be going with this.
Yeah. Don't spoil it.
Okay.
No spoilers.
I won't.
Fear, temper, hatred, fury,
Dark side,
happy, enrage, emotion, rage, hate, mean, ire, mad, wrath, calm, fight. So just remember as many of those as you can. It doesn't matter how many you remember, just remember them. Okay. Cool.
Dyslexic and the autistic person are not
it's fine. It's not a test, don't worry. There's something cool about it. Cool. So, false memory. That's what we're going to be discussing today.
I really thought you were going to go through the list of getting the Winter Soldier to go into assassin mode.
Yeah, that would have been good.
Laurie. I've just done that with Dave. Look, he's gone into a super soldier mode.
I've got the haircut.
Do you know what? Bible's got a good point, right? You've done this whole test thing for us, right? They can rewind the stream.
I mean, to be fair, we can too if we are really clever about it.
No, God, you don't need. It's fun. It's a fun thing. It's not a test.
Yeah, but we want to win. Damn it!
You can win if you don't remember. If you don't, don't worry. We'll get to that.
To be fair, I'm just going to say whatever words I want and then claim that it's a Mandela effect, and we've split off into.
So. Let's talk about false memory. So first we need to think about what memory is. So what is memory?
I don't remember.
That's what I'm asking.
Oh my god, you don't know what memory is? I thought you're supposed to be a psychologist.
What's memory? I don't want to talk at you guys. I want some interaction.
And how would you like it defined? Would you like it sort of...
any way you want to define it.
Okay, I'd say a lot of it is stored data in our neural pathways.
Yeah, and to recollect something, but I don't know if that's just using a signal.
Yeah, so that's it. That's exactly what it is, right? It's our ability to recall information. Yeah, and that can be sensory information, so information from our sensory organs, or it can be like kind of information we've read, like on topics and stuff. So it's just our ability to recall things, memories and stuff like past events and that kind of thing. And are they accurate? Is it accurate?
No.
No. It's not like recording, is it? It's not like a video camera where we record things and then we get a near perfect kind of image of what happened, like with CCTV. No,
definitely.
So why isn't it perfect?
There's a lot of different reasons, I think. I mean, sometimes it comes down to a personal bias that we might have. I think sometimes we're just, we've got erroneous memories anyway. I think sometimes memories get confused. You get different experiences that blend together.
Over the course of time as well, you're not actually remembering the original event. You're remembering your last memory of
The event.
Yeah.
Like a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be due to efficiency mostly, right? Like, it seems to me that only some things are important. Even as you experience stuff through your senses, you're sort of prioritizing stuff that you think is more important. You're passing that data. So, like, memory is just sort of accelerating that process and just sort of keeping what is really sort of the highlight of that.
Exactly, and the thing is, so what we do, and this happens with our normal. I think we spoke about this with the consciousness thing. Is we have to fill in the gaps, right? So if there's like a person in our memory of a situation, we don't remember who it is, we might fill that gap in with somebody we know, yeah. Or if we don't remember quite what somebody looked like back when, they were a teenager, we might have a memory of them, but with them how they look now. Has that ever happened to you guys, where you kind of remembered, like, there's a guy that I know who he had like kind of this long, like, floppy blonde hair for years and years and years, and for the past 3 or 4 years actually longer than that now, 6 years, he's been bald. Now whenever I think of us at school, he's bald.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's just because it's a representation of him I have at the moment. So our memories are quite flawed in that sense. They're not exact replications of what we have been through. So now what I'm going to ask you guys is,
I even do that with myself.
Yeah, we do.
I insert who I am now into old memories, which, considering I now identify as a completely different gender, is rather confusing at times.
I can imagine it would be.
Yeah.
And I think even as you gain information, you seem to sort of modify your past memories based on new information that you gained. I think a good example, I think Luke, you will appreciate this, is sort of magic tricks, right? Like if you see one and you don't know how it's done, you sort of remember it in a very different way than when you actually then understand how it's done. Then you sort of you can't access the same sort of
This is a really good point
anymore.
actually. If a magician ever says, and I shuffled the deck in the middle of a magic trick going through, this is a bit of a it's not a massive one though, is it, Philip? But if they say, oh yeah, so we went, you picked a card, I shuffled the deck, oh no, you put it in the middle, I shuffled the deck, we then went through the deck, you pulled one out, it wasn't your card, and then suddenly I flicked it and it changed to your card, right? If they've done that, then they haven't shuffled the deck and they didn't put it in the middle. But when you remember it later, you would remember them putting it in the middle and shuffling them, and it works every time. It's crazy. But I really want you guys to try and remember the words that we said earlier.
I think anger was in there.
Oh, Joe, you legend! That was not in there. That is a critical word. That's a critical word from that list of so.
All I had in my head was the dark side. All I was thinking about was Darth Vader, because you were. Yeah, there was fear was in there. I remembered fear, and then that's about it.
Fear.
Wrath.
I don't remember wrath.
Hate.
It almost doesn't matter now. Your memory, you remembered. Yeah, hey, they were all in there, Chris. You had a good memory, but anger is the critical word that we were looking for, right? Anger wasn't in that list.
Yeah, well,
none of those words rhyme with anger. None of those words sound like anger.
Yeah, but Darth Vader.
They have a semantic relationship with
I was going to
anger.
say a lot of them have a kind of relationship to the actual emotion itself.
Yeah, so that's a really key thing that we need to think about when we're thinking about false memory, is that it's not based on the way things sound or the way things look, but it's what they mean to us. So we're more likely to fill in a gap with something that means the same thing. So if you're thinking, like, if I said ship, ocean, water, etc., you might come up with boat, or you might come up with sea, even though I haven't said those words in your memory of them, right?
So in the same sort of way, people will use
Pirate.
synonyms for words. So, for example, not believing something and disbelief are sometimes regarded as synonyms, even though they actually speak of slightly different things, at least when you're speaking in logical terms. So, but because they're synonyms, people will use the same thing, and people tend to go through synonyms of words and say, this means that. Because they've gone through iteration of various synonyms to get there, and actually, that's not right. That almost means that, and that almost means that. I mean, synonyms mean something that is nearly the same, but not necessarily exactly the same.
Yeah, and this is the cause of many fights and stuff between people, because I might say something to you, Joe, and you've heard it in a certain way, and then when you remember that situation, you remember it with a different word that you have a little bit more like kind of like you might say it. I don't know what the words would be, but it might have more venom for you, that word. And you'll say, you said this to me, and they'll be like, I never said that. This is what I said. And then it's actually something quite innocuous, but you've transformed that in your memory to be that worse word. And this is how a false memory works. It's like it fills in the gaps of stuff that we think is stuff that we can't quite remember, and it can be affected as well, which is the key thing. So if we're thinking about the Mandela effect, for instance, now I'm back onto it. So is there a big fight going on in the comments? Because tell Peace and Wealthseeker to listen to the Mandela effect now. So let's think about there's two really obvious ones for me. The first one is the Luke, I am your father line from Star Wars, right?
Which is actually, no, I am your father.
Precisely, right? So the line is actually, no, I am your father, but everyone thinks it's Luke, I am your father. People remember it, and people said, oh, well, that must be CERN. They created a black hole, which created an alternate dimension that we're now in, and that must have changed the movie. Because that's what essentially the people that follow the Mandela effect think. Okay?
Oh, sorry, it does my head in so much. The degree of narcissism that must be present to think that your memory is perfect and the universe is wrong.
You're so smart that the only way you could be wrong is if the universe shifted in dimension.
It does my head in so much.
So the thing that's happened here, right, is that how many times have you guys seen Star Wars?
Which one?
Probably 100.
The second one, the one where Luke
Empire Strikes Back.
Empire Strikes Back. Yeah, that's the one where he says
probably only about 4 times actually.
4 times. Chris, you said a couple of hundred.
A shit ton for me as well. Yeah, I can't remember how many times.
I guarantee you that even if you've seen it like, I don't know, 100 times or whatever, you've heard the line, Luke, I am your father, much more times. So it's an issue of exposure, right? So the media, when they kind of announced it, they just got the line wrong. Someone got the line wrong, and then that kind of snowballed into everyone getting the line wrong in the media around it, including Darth Vader himself in an interview. I can't remember his name. Who is it? Mufasa and Darth Vader. Yes. So
James
he
Jones.
got the line wrong. Yeah. Sorry?
Or Prowse.
Oh, not Prowse. No, not Prowse. We forget about Prowse, don't we? Yeah. And it's just that exposure. You're exposed to that line way more often, so you just think that that's a line in the film.
Mm.
And then you remember it as being that line because you kind of merge this thing that you've been exposed to a bunch of times. That must be the line because everyone's saying that's the line.
Yeah.
And then you merge it with the film, even though you saw the film and that wasn't what you heard.
Yeah. So just to confirm, right, just for everyone out there, it wasn't because of a black hole. Your memory is not perfect. Perfect? My words are not perfect either. Talking is hard.
Yes.
A long day of drinking in the sun.
The other one is Walker's Crisps. Do you guys remember when they changed the colours of their packets from cheese and onion being green to cheese and onion being blue and vice versa?
No.
They've got around the Walkers, haven't they?
Yeah, I've always thought they've always been backwards in my head anyway.
Yeah, they have always been backwards. Yeah. And lots of people think that they changed, and I remember hearing an announcement about it changing the packets and stuff, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's like a really big one.
Didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, Walkers in the 90s changed their packets over. So cheese and onion used to be green, and then they swapped cheese and onion and salt and vinegar over. So
I think they're getting confused with Golden Wonder, because back then Golden
exactly
Wonder were the other big make,
Yes.
and Golden Wonder had it the standard way that everyone else does it, but you had those too, and sometimes I'd pick up automatically because my mum usually bought Golden Wonder crisps, but whenever I picked up Walkers, I always pick up the wrong one and go, why?
So your memory is not false, Joe. Your memory is legit, because that's what Walkers actually have on their website. An FAQ answering the question, when did you change your crisp packets colours over? And they say, we never did. They say
we've always done it wrong.
Yeah, but Golden Wonder
it's one of the ones I remember because I fucking hate cheese and onion crisps. And when I was a kid, I had to double check every time I picked up a packet to make sure I wasn't being poisoned.
Yeah.
Possibly my favourite flavour, but yeah.
So that's,
we'd do well on a multi-pack, wouldn't we, Chris?
So yeah, they people think that they swapped over, and they're like, "Well, that never happened. What is going on? Walkers must be lying for some reason." But it is actually just that Golden Wonder were a bigger company, and then when Gary Lineker became like the face of it, Walkers kind of overtook. So.
I know the really common one is with is it Berenstein Bears or something?
Oh yeah, people think it's Bearstein Bears or something like that, isn't it? They think the name's something else, or it's got like it. Yeah. Well, and there's other things like people like picking out like a curve or a curl or something in the Ford logo or something like that, or the fact it's not underlined or something like that. It's like, that's a minor detail. You probably just didn't pay attention to it until right this second.
Yeah.
And now you're like, oh my God, I never saw that before. Well, no shit, because you never really looked at the logo properly before. You know?
Another big one is what's his
Mandela.
name? All right. Nelson Mandela. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, people thought that he died in prison, didn't they?
Yeah. Wasn't it Steve Biko or somebody like that?
It was someone else, yeah. Yeah.
I actually do. I mean, I remember hearing from others that he died in prison, and going, but he's been released. Sorry?
But Alan Titchmarsh did his garden.
And he led the country for like years.
Yeah. There are a fair few of things. Sorry, Chris.
The Monopoly Man, whether he had a monocle or not, is another one I seem to remember.
No, I think I did fall prey to that one. I could have sworn that he did, and apparently he didn't. Or the other way round, I can't remember.
Yeah, he doesn't have one. He doesn't have one.
Yeah, but I swear I remember an advert or something like that, or one of the quiz machines or something. I swear, even though I now know from looking it up and it being it's never happened, I still in my head think, no, it must have done. I'm sure.
I would argue that that's an expectation. So I think our expectations influence our memories, right? So we're trying to form an expectation, and I think you would expect a man with a top hat and a suit like that and a mustache to wear a monocle.
You could be right.
So when you remember it, your expectation is planting that in your kind of mind, and
probably because you've never paid enough attention to it in the first place as well. So it's filling in the blanks with the expectation. Precisely.
And what else influences our expectation is post hoc information. The information that comes in after the experience that then changes our view in the past, which is absolutely crazy. So this is where Loftus comes in. I don't know if Shannon's still watching, but we're talking about Loftus now, Loftus in Palmer. So for instance, if you saw a car crash, and I said to you, like, oh, how fast was that car going when it smashed into the other vehicle? what do you think you would say compared to like if I said, how fast was that car going when it hit the other vehicle?
Right. So it's the wording you're using. We sort of infer from the words you're using. If you're saying smashed rather than hit, smash sounds like it was traveling faster. Therefore, you've planted something in my mind. Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And when you imagine that car crash, because I'm sure you all did imagine a car crash when I said that, right? Did you imagine that there was broken glass?
Well, actually, I imagined a completely crumpled front when you said smashed, and then when you said hit, I imagined a ding.
Yeah, so that's it as well. So what you can get is you can get two people who've looked at the same situation, the same exact crash of a car, and give them two different questions with one word difference, and they'll come up with completely different answers.
Yeah, and I suppose if language can influence... Sorry.
So what you're saying is, if any of us ever have to fill out an insurance claim, use the word bumped.
Yes, precisely.
Unless they are going into you, at which point you say smashed.
Yes, smashed.
I forgot what I was going to say, so carry on. No, language. So if language can influence our imagination, then it makes sense that it could influence our memory in the same way, especially if they're in any sort of way uncertain.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that kind of like, you don't necessarily pay enough attention. You're passively observing a video, and then you're asked to recall it later on, and someone says, oh yeah, so when it smashed in, was there any broken glass or anything like that? And then you'll be like, yes, there was, because you just said smashed. So the car must have been going really fast, and there must have been broken glass. And that's what they found in Loftus and Palmer, was that they had like 5 different words they used. It was like hit. I think bumped was one. I can't remember. Bumped might be a false memory for me right now.
Because you said it.
You can have, and then they have smash. They have a couple more, and it's like the more severe the word, the higher the speed that they estimated, but then also they remember things about the situation that weren't true at all, that they never saw. So like smashed glass, crumpled fronts, etc.
With the smashed example and then imagining glass, is that also because there's a link not just with what we imagine the speed to be, but because there's a link between smashing and glass in and of itself?
I think so.
That would make sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Although the fact that I didn't think about glass in that regard, does that mean I'm just faulty?
Yeah. You need to go back to the shop, I'm afraid. Get a new Joe. So that kind of leads on to the second point of today, like leading questions. Yeah, so this is a big thing in the courtroom, actually. Is that you can get people who are eyewitnesses to remember details that they didn't have any recollection of before, and get them to then make claims that aren't necessarily true through questioning in a specific way. And it's not allowed, but it's almost impossible to actually to filter out.
Yeah, because
as soon as you've changed that memory, like Chris said earlier, your next memory of that memory is the previous memory. So you end up building up, and that becomes an entrenched belief about the situation, and it's really difficult to get away from that without seeing like a video of it before and being like, could have sworn there was broken glass in that crash. That's the only way of really kind of like shaking that out of you, because it becomes entrenched after that.
I suppose as well with testimony in courtrooms and leading questions, it can be, or people doubting their own memory can also be used as a way to create those false memories, right? So if there was an attack, somebody could say, and you don't remember them holding a knife then?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're there like, I don't know, do I? And kind of doubting themselves on the fallibility of their memory.
Well, on that subject, I mean, that's actually them putting the idea in by saying something in the negative, because I mean, when I did my NLP course, God, a long time ago now, one of the things they said was speaking about things in the negative instantly puts the idea in your mind anyway. Like the simple example they always give is, don't think about pink elephants, and what does everyone do in that example? You're instantly thinking about pink elephants, and so you going, they didn't have a knife, did they? It instantly puts the idea in your head that they had a knife. So yeah,
and that's how you get like a lot of people kind of like adding details after the fact. So their initial kind of like, so you get like either a victim or a witness to an offence, and their initial interview, they won't have details like, oh, he had a knife, or he was this person, or anything like that. And then later on, so they might not even know who it was, right? And then they go through doing a lineup or something, and then they see someone who may resemble the individual, may not, and then after that point, they're adamant that it was that individual.
Mm.
And eyewitness testimony makes up like 75% of wrongful convictions in the US. So it's a big issue. Like bad eyewitness testimony is a big issue, because it is also one of the most compelling pieces of evidence to juries.
Yeah, because you can connect with a person, whereas you can't connect with, oh, well, this study said this. Most jurors don't really even want to be there. They want to get over and done with it.
It's because we have to trust our memories, right? You have to be able to trust your memories. And if you're told that your memories are really shit, actually, you have to accept that it's not just like, oh, if this person's memory is really shit, my memory is really shit. We're saying everyone's memory is shit. So you trust your own memory, and then therefore you trust other people's memory. If it was him, if they're saying adamantly, yes, I absolutely categorically, and they're not lying because they believe it, then they have no reason to not believe that individual.
Oh, there's a comment that's just come in that might be interesting to address right now. So it's from Bible, and it says, I have an above average memory, but it's funny that leads to me basically somewhat controlling group memories and have friends going along with what I misremember initially. That's interesting, actually. I mean,
I trust his memory.
Yeah, because it's better than everyone else's.
Yeah.
And that's almost created a Mandela effect, because when he gets it wrong, they just instantly assume, oh, well, he must know what he's talking about. Maybe I'm misremembering. Really interesting.
There's also sort of like, at this point, I guess, there is an effect played by in-group bias as well, in a sense, right? You don't want to be the only person out that is saying something different. So if everyone is sort of convinced that something happened, then you sort of start to see that as well. I would imagine, at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think another problem that we have is also exaggeration within groups. So something that happened to me is when I was either last year of school or first couple of years of college, I always used to go around to parties at one of my friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
She, amazing person. Her mum used to go to a cash and carry, spend like 300 quid on alcohol. Everybody got royally wasted. It was brilliant. One of these parties, somebody crashed the party and then phoned up and invited a couple of their friends round, and then a couple more. And somebody said, if they phone anybody else up, we're going to have to phone the police. By the time the party came around the next year, everybody remembered riot vans showing up and a massive fight breaking out between all these people who had gate crashed the party. It's like, oh, that just not how. What steps had to happen for a threat of maybe making a phone call? But people were absolutely positive that it happened.
I
mean, that's a really good example. I love that example. Yeah.
There are kind of like half a dozen people, and they're like, no, we were here when the van showed up. It's like, but you weren't.
Because they didn't. Because I was there and they didn't. I wasn't there, obviously.
I wasn't wasted enough to miss a 24-person brawl and riot van showing up at her house. Partly because the fact that she'd never been allowed to have another party in her life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the most extreme example that I can relate back from my life. But it's just got to come from that exaggeration. And like Philip was saying, there's that in-group where somebody's exaggerated it a little bit and everybody's gone along with it. And then somebody else exaggerates it a little bit more. And then, people are just...
Sort of like stories told through oral tradition. Or
it's exactly the same.
The telephone game, or as it was called when I was at school, it was called Chinese Whispers, which I assume it's not allowed to be called anymore for PC terms. I think in America it's called the telephone game, and it's essentially you whisper in someone's ears next to you, and it goes round and round and round and round and round. And when the person who's next to you on this side says what you said, and it nearly always ends up being something completely different. And
that's what you... Sorry.
So I was just going to say, in a story told through oral tradition, there's that isn't necessarily consciously done. Whereas a story told through oral tradition, if you're a storyteller, you want your story to be interesting, to captivate your audience. So you're going to start exaggerating, and you're going to do it sort of that way. So you're regaling this experience. And there might be other people who were there and had the same experience with you and nodding along and going, oh, yes, yes, yes. And then people will pass that story on and on and on and exaggerate it a little bit more to, maintain that audience. And I think that's why a lot of, especially ancient history, does seem to be quite exaggerated in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the Bible, the resurrection story is actually pretty good example of that, right? Because you see this story, like from the earlier accounts, it's a very simple story, and then as you go on, it becomes more extravagant and more extravagant, until you get to sort of non-official gospels, and then it's totally blown out of proportion. But of course, those are not accepted as canonical.
Yeah, and if you look through the Islamic Hadith, you can see something similar happening with Muhammad.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I quite like the idea that the original resurrection story was Jesus got a bit sick after a dodgy kebab one weekend and then moved to Liverpool.
Food poisoning. He had COVID-0.
He just got really pissed and had to sleep for 2 days. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's how a lot of legends are formed. I think for instance, I think Greek legends are like the heroes, especially. I think were real people that did amazing things, but nowhere near as amazing as the legends make out. They were just like top quality soldiers like we have today. And I think that it would be really tough to get those kind of similar legends around today, because if somebody says, oh yeah, Dwayne Johnson did this thing, and everyone's like, prove it, I need a video of that. Rather than just hearing the story,
It is crazy how much we do accept of ancient history, yet today we were so determined on, well, show me that this will happen.
It's the information age, isn't it? It's just how the information age works.
Yeah, I guess it also kind of makes sense, because like from history you just have that, right? You cannot pretend to have anything else really, because like that's all you're ever going to get. So you sort of have to do the best you can with what you have. While today, like for certain events, you could, at least in theory, pretend to have like some better information, I guess, to sort of draw your own conclusions.
Yeah. That's fair. And another thing to remember is back then, recording history wasn't quite like recording history is now.
Yep.
There weren't people dedicated to it. There were people who would tell stories in town centers and get paid for it. So the better the tale they told, the more money they would make. And then that would be picked up by another historian who would then pass that on, and the tale would change.
And we're back to the problem with oral tradition again.
Yeah. Like, good example is the Greeks, and with Cleopatra arriving in Greece. And if you look at the Egyptian account, it's very different to the Greek account, which sort of favors Greece and it has more flourish, and it's quite interesting to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, even Ramses, I think, like second, he had like a depiction in Abu Simbel of him winning a battle, but it was actually a draw or something like that because like, they wanted him to look good, right? Like there's a lot of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even sorry, go on.
No, I just wanted to say, like, that's why I'm generally not mad at people who are like, I'm not going to say skeptical of everything that comes from history because that is sort of irrational, right? But you can have sort of like, you can see that this is sort of on a different level, right? That you should take it carefully, right? But what I dislike, for example, about sort of Jesus mythicists is that they seem to sort of cherry pick, right? Like if you're gonna be skeptical about that, right, then you should be skeptical about pretty much everything around that period of time, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to draw that sort of level of skepticism, like fine, but then apply it at least consistently, right? Don't go cherry picking this story and be like, oh, we don't have enough evidence here, but for the rest of it, you're fine with it. Right?
Especially when you consider, actually, there is more evidence for Jesus the man, not the biblical Jesus, but Jesus the man, than there are from a lot of other stories at that time. You know,
exactly.
and
isn't it that? Sorry to interrupt. Isn't it that historians tend to agree on two things: that Jesus was born and that Jesus was crucified? Like they know that Jesus existed in that, like, was born around that time, and that he was crucified. But
I don't know if they can say that.
Was...
Not necessarily. I mean, Yeshua the man, but Jesus' brother is another common one. James.
Yeah, the one I was going to bring up.
Oh, right. I haven't really looked into it, to be honest.
Yeah, but like what I'm trying to say is it's like it's almost natural, I would say, to look at the evidence that is there and then to say, oh well, this is not good evidence because you're comparing it to the standard of evidence from today, right? For any event that happened, but that's not what realistically you're going to get, right? So you have to sort of compare it with the rest of what is available for the time, and I think that is where the problem usually arises with Jesus.
And this is another like really important point around academia and misunderstanding what an academic kind of field of study uses and tries to achieve, right? Because historians, they get their answers in a different way to scientists, right?
Yeah.
But people who have been like led down the route of science and who are trying to kind of understand the world in a scientific lens and stuff, and apply everything they've learned about the scientific method to every other field of study, like philosophy, to history, to everything, and it doesn't fit because it's not the tool for that job. You know, historians have to work with this absence of information and try and piece together all these little puzzle pieces, like you know, this type of pottery and this type of sword and this building and these skeletons and stuff like that, and work to use all that information and bring it together to make something that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's why evidence is paradigmatic.
There's a joke, isn't there, that if we use the scientific method, the only thing we can tell about the ancient Greeks is they're a bunch of skeletons that lived underground and collected broken bottles.
That's good. I like that.
That is funny. I do actually think Beeble has a really good point as well, though. Like, conspiracy theories might be like the legends of the future. Maybe that's going to be the thing that people believe about our time due to the kind of amount of information that's there about it at the moment, like stuff around, not necessarily QAnon stuff, I think that's a bit far, but maybe stuff around, like, you know, COVID as a weapon and 5G and stuff like that. You know, that might be the stuff that gets passed on that's a false memory of, you know, oh yeah, you know, this was something that is something that happened when actually it didn't happen. You know,
5G and coronavirus is a weapon, and I can prove it.
But
I was a 4G phone before I got my vaccination.
And then the label printed itself after
the atoms rearranged itself.
I what's his name? Avocado wolf. Yeah, he's probably got a cure for coronavirus, which is something like bitter apricot kernels thrown into a NutriBullet. And actually, I haven't heard from him in a while. Actually, I haven't heard anything about him in a long time. He was doing the rounds for a really long period and being, I mean, so much crazy stuff. And I actually haven't heard of him in forever.
Maybe
Taking the money and run.
I wouldn't be surprised. Or maybe he got a virus.
it is quite worrying that there is the potential of these conspiracy theories being the legends. At a time where we have more information than ever before in human history, and people in the future are going to look back and think that we were all flat earthers and anti-vaxxers.
It will.
I really hope
Like
not.
we look back and think that everyone around like Galileo's time was a flat earther when they weren't. Not everyone was. Not everyone was. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, even in ancient Greece, they weren't flat earthers, were they?
No.
After that, more people became flat earthers. So
Yeah.
as time goes on, more people become flat earthers, and the more we can test and prove that the Earth is not flat, the more people believe it's flat. I mean, what's that? What? Does that fit into
That's
tonight?
beyond my knowledge. That's a paradox. Like
You can book a flight to space now. Let's hope that this will bring stuff to an end. Although, like, I'm sure that they're gonna claim that the windows are displaced or something like that. Like, at some point.
I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I tell you what, just break the window whilst you're up there. See what happens. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, air's a myth. They don't need it.
Oh, have you seen those people that are like, what are they called? Breatharians.
No, I know what you're talking about.
Breatharians.
Yeah.
You can survive on breath alone for a month.
And they clearly all eat as well. They clearly all eat. Like you can tell.
There was some Australian woman who claimed to be a breatharian and then got caught eating in a restaurant or something like that. Yeah,
Amazing.
Does it count if you eat your food really fast? Because people say that you inhale it.
I like it. I mean, I could be a breatharian if that's all you need.
How do we just get onto conspiracy theorists? This is like the Joe Rogan show now.
Well, I don't know. Wouldn't you be saying they're all true if we were on that one?
They are all true. Is that not what we're saying?
I don't know. I don't remember anymore. What does it all mean? So we covered off false memory and the Mandela effect. There was something else that you wanted to cover as well tonight, which is something that we've had a conversation about before.
Yeah, this is my favourite part of this whole thing, to be honest.
Oh, well, you take it away.
So facial recognition skills, right? So most people think they're pretty good at it.
I don't.
Most people aren't very good at it. So there's an average. So this is actually what I did my undergrad dissertation in. So yeah, it's quite interesting. There's an average level of face recognition. So if you're given like 10 faces, you'll be able to recognize 6 of them again. So 60% is the average. And that's kind of like, it seemed like loads of people just accepted that as the baseline for a lot of time. But actually what we're finding is that it's an inbuilt skill. You have a skill in face recognition. So your ability to, and let me, so this is, it's not different if you see a face for 10 seconds and then you wait 2 minutes and then you're shown a bunch of faces and you have to pick the person out, right? Compared to if you have somebody's driver's license and below that is a list of faces, a bunch of faces, the 60% still stands. So people are just as bad at recognizing faces that are right next to each other as they are if there's a gap, which is a bit shocking, right?
Yeah. Well,
Presumably it does depend how long you get to see the face.
Exposure is a big factor, yeah. Yeah, exposure is a big factor. So, if you have 2 minutes to see the face and you're more familiar with it, and then you're more likely. In fact, we're very good at recognizing familiar faces.
I was going to say, don't use this as an excuse to ignore your children when they call you.
I don't remember your face. Unless you have prosopagnosia, in which case you have no recognition of anyone's faces ever. Yeah. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Einstein and Marilyn Monroe. Like that's what prosopagnosia is.
Apart from the tits.
That's literally how they tell, is the external kind of features, like the hair and that. So, if you can...
a really cool picture, which is Marilyn Monroe and Einstein overlapping for each other, don't they?
Yeah. Is that the distance you're at from the picture that it changes? Yeah, I like that picture.
Yeah, some of it's fuzzy and some of it's in fine detail. So the further away you are, the less you can see the fine detail, and the fuzzy I think it's Marilyn Monroe's fuzzy, but as you get closer, the wrinkles and stuff of sharp detail come into focus, and you can see Einstein.
That's cool.
Yeah, but yeah, I actually struggle with faces. A lot of the time when I see someone again, I go, I swear you don't look like that, but you obviously do because you're you, and I recognise your voice and your mannerisms. And I'm quite good at picking up on people's mannerisms. And generally, if I say that person looks like that one, I'm talking about their mannerisms, or they remind me of them because of the way they enunciate their words. But I have a lot of trouble remembering faces, and I have to link them to something else. And I've got a friend who, for 3 months, I mean, I'm terrible with names as well, so this really doesn't help. But I started work for this company, and for 3 months he was guy that looks like the guy. Guy that looks like the Jewish guy that played the Indian guy in Short Circuit. That was that's the only way I could think, and yeah.
That's a funny way of thinking.
But that's sort of how I have to relate things. That's how people come up, and that's how I remember people is generally that way, and that's how I managed to start building their features in my head as well. Is that sort of association with other things? I can't just think, oh yeah, they look like this and had these kind of eyebrows, and it's not that. It's they kind of reminded me of a hamster.
Yeah.
See, as we're on facial recognition and mannerisms, and we have a bit of a wider audience at the moment, I have to do a poll. I'm not the only person who thinks that Joe is like Nish Kumar, am I?
Do you know who Nish
Kumar well enough
to
make that claim? I'm afraid.
Don't know who it is. Yeah,
I mean, we've got a big nose.
I don't know.
I think it's just because he's a non-threatening beta male.
That's funny. So actually, thinking about mannerisms and body language and stuff like that, it's only 20%. You can recognize people's bodies far less than you can recognize their faces. Yeah. So if you were to say you were to see CCTV of somebody who committed a crime, you might not be able to tell who that is, but then someone who knows them really well will instantly be able to tell. And you'll get 20% right at the time, depending on your skill level. It is skill level as well. It's an innate skill. And there's no evidence that it increases through practice. So there's no way of training it.
So is it even a skill then if you can't improve it?
Okay, it's not a skill. It's a trait.
Okay,
is that a better word?
Sorry, Chris, you cut out there.
More of a talent than a skill.
Yeah. Yeah, so some people are really good at it, and some people are not so good at it. And essentially, the problem is, so this is what my supervisor was going into, is that you have a bunch of people at airports who might be really shit at recognizing faces, even if it's right next to another image of that individual, making a judgment about whether this person is the same person, and allowing them to enter and exit the country, right? There have been known terrorists who have gotten into and out of the country many, many times by just using someone else's passport.
Yeah.
because of that very reason, because the facial recognition skills of the individuals at the passport checkout is bad. And my supervisor was doing lots of research at like Gatwick Airport and seeing if this skill is any different or if training would help and stuff, and it's not. It's 60%. Some people are really bad at it. Some people are very good at it, and it's not trainable. So it's a massive security risk.
Yeah. Which is why they're getting computers to do it now.
Computers are 60% as well.
Oh, really?
I wonder
Yeah.
if it is partially due to what we were discussing when we were talking about AI, where there's a bias or more of an ability within one's own racial and ethnic group as well.
So yeah, that's the same race bias. Yeah, that's a real factor. So you're more likely to get a higher score for people in your own race than you are to get a score from people outside of your race.
Yes,
that's a yeah. So that
we're used to seeing, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but I think it's 60% with it. So the study I did was came out at 60% average score, and I didn't actually take the race into account, but all of the people who were targets were white. So that was actually a because I read it earlier, I remember this now. A limitation on my study is I didn't take the same race bias into account when I was researching it.
So this not being good at recognizing faces, but being good at recognizing sort of traits and stuff. Is that part of the thinking behind like the exaggerated features in photo fits? Does that influence it?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, like when the police draw it.
Not just that. When you see them on screen and they've got like the nose is exaggerated or the square chin is a little bit over exaggerated.
Do you mean they've exaggerated it in order to make it more memorable?
Yeah, or more noticeable, or
potentially. But it might also be that the person who is saying it might have over exaggerated that in their head as well. The person who's like helping to draw it. I'm not sure. I know that photo fits are particularly bad in terms of actually having any effect in the catching of a offender.
I'm thinking as well,
because of this
like
reason.
missing persons, people like John Does and Jane Does, you often see like a picture, do you recognize this person? And the picture is slightly deformed and the features are over exaggerated.
So I guess the idea is that if you know the person, it's a bit like, when they show CCTV images, familiar faces and familiar bodies you can recognize really well. Like I would be able to tell. When you pick someone out really far away that you think and you're like, oh my god, it is that person, and you don't know how you caught because there's just a bunch of other people there
based on their gait or something.
Yeah, exactly. That person's walk and stuff, so your brain picks up on it. You're like, that's a person I know, and you need to be able to do that in order to make sure that you know where people are and stuff. But
yeah,
when it's a stranger, you have no idea. Like, it's basically impossible to pick them out. They just look like another person, it's really interesting when you get to know an actor. And then you start seeing them in everything because you realize actually
I suffer that a lot, and that punches me every film.
Yeah, because you start to familiarize yourself with their face and stuff, and it might have been a smaller part in a different movie, so they weren't the main part or whatever. And it's the same thing. So you become more familiar, and then you can pick people out better. And I guess with those photo fits, they're hoping that people who are familiar with that person will see the resemblance. But they have had a backfire once. I think there was a person who was murdered. I think it was in like Thailand or something, and they did a photo fit, and it looked like this other guy who was a suspect anyway. And then they arrested him, and he spent a couple of years in jail. And then they reopened the case because they found out that there was different DNA on the bodies or something. I can't remember this case exactly. And then they looked around again and found the guy that actually did it, and he looked very much like the guy that was originally arrested. So, and he looked more like the photo fit actually. So they both look like the photo fit, which is the issue. So
yeah, there was something happened recently on YouTube and TikTok, where a TikTok went about with this woman with two black eyes, and everybody thought it was this missing girl, and there was this whole craze about producing videos to get her name out there, and it turned out to be a completely different girl.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, something similar to that. Just because the faces had some
Similarities.
Sort of similarities. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure though that like AI is better than 60% at recognizing faces. At least like if you think about like there is, for example, I don't know if you guys use Google Photos, but like there is this built-in feature that where it can categorize faces, right?
Yeah,
And
both
so you
Google
can sort of
Photos and
search-
Amazon Photos do that.
Yeah, and you can search for the name of the person, and then it shows all, like in all pictures that you have, where that person is. And it works like really, really well. Like I haven't had a missed hit, I think, ever. And it starts with a very small sample set where it asks you, you know, is this you? And then you have to confirm, right? But after a while, it sort of gets it, and then it's very hard.
It struggles
Cool.
with babies because all babies look the same. But other than that, it's really good.
Yeah, I've had like photos of me when I was like much younger, and it still recognized me, right? Like I was really impressed with that. Like from 10 years old or something, right? It still was able to tell that it was me. So like, yeah,
I'm not sure the software in I think it's the airport software that my supervisor was telling me.
It might be different, yes.
And I'm not sure if it's AI based. I think it's more of a single program that just like matches features to the features on the passport photo. Yeah. So it doesn't build up its information like most AIs does, and it doesn't do any machine learning. It's just like, oh, this face structure is like this, and this face structure is the same, so they're the same person.
Yeah, because there are sort of facial unlock methods on phones nowadays as well, right? And they seem to be very, very secure. So, like, yeah, it just seems weird as a general sort of assessment of AI or computing system.
I imagine the airport one is similar to the systems they use in casinos, and that in the place Las Vegas. That's the one.
Yeah, it might be more like sort of measuring eye distance and sort of trying to match that data instead of sort of an AI approach where you have sort of a large database and then try to sort of brute force it in a way.
I think an AI would probably be better, to be honest, because then it's going to get better the more people go through. And the amount of people that go through airports, you're going to get a lot of data really quickly. So it's going to be more accurate. So...
Yeah, I mean, Steen raised the point that we discussed a little while ago in our artificial ethics stream, where AI in general is biased by the data, so carries the same human bias in most cases, and that is true. But obviously, if you give the AI the ability to pick up its own data, like you were saying in an airport, and it was, over time, was looking at these things bit by bit, you'd hope that it would improve. So yeah. Well said though. Also, Bible has asked a question from I think it was from a little while ago, and it says, is that true for people you know for a long time, or is that more mannerisms you recognize too? I assume that was when I was talking about how I struggle to recognize people. And yeah, even people I know well and know for a long time, I do still struggle. And it's still more the mannerisms and the way they speak and things like that. Even when we jump on stream sometimes, I do have a moment of, oh yeah, that is what you look like, or I don't remember you having that on your face, or something along those lines.
Another interesting point about this is context. So, say a kid would be able to pick their teacher out really easily in school, but if they see them in town, because they're not used to them in that different context, they just don't recognise them in the slightest.
That's true.
People get that with celebrities, don't they? The difference between seeing them on a screen and seeing them in person.
Yeah, well, they're not dolled up. They're wearing normal clothes. You don't expect to see them there, so you don't. You just assume that they're a normal person.
Yeah.
I've completely blanked people I've worked with in the past because I didn't like them. No, because that's not where I expect to see them. And who?
From now on, I'll just point them to the stream and say, "Yeah, 60% chance that I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry." was just one of those 40% times where I didn't.
That is, to be fair, that is only for unfamiliar people. So, so they might be like, "What? You're not familiar with me?
Yeah,
I see you every day." It's more like
worrying, though, that with unfamiliar people, granted, but it's only slightly better than chance.
yeah.
Which, because 60% doesn't sound that bad until you do realise that it's only 10% better than chance.
So I think
So,
I think it's actually a bit more than 10%, just because I think the lineups that they. Wait a second, I'm just trying to think the way the study works. No, you're right. Yeah.
It's actually a useful thing if you're a drug dealer, because once the face starts becoming familiar, you know you're being followed by the cops.
Yeah, that's true.
I think there's 5 different responses you can have, though, and 2 of them are right, because it's difficult. It's difficult to say what the chance level is.
everything is 50-50. Either it's true or it's not.
So, but you're given a face, and then you're given like 8 faces to pick out from afterwards, right? So you've got essentially a 1 in 8 chance in that situation to get the answer right, and then you repeat that 40 times, and some of the times the face isn't there. So you have the face is there and you get it right. The face is there and you get it wrong. The face isn't there and you get it right. The face isn't there and you get it wrong. Or you say that the face... Oh, wait, what's the 5th one? Or that you say the face isn't there, but it is there. So that's the 5th one, yeah? There's 5 options. So is that 1 in 5 chance and you get it right?
No, because more than one of those is getting it right.
So that's a 2 out of 5 chance of getting it right.
So yeah, it is better than a 10% above chance. The 40% chance of getting it right, people get it right 60% of the time. So yeah.
Only very slightly, yeah.
But still, it's only 20% better.
Still only 20% better, yeah, exactly. And some people on my study got 0. That means that they
didn't recognise anyone.
Worse than chance. Yeah, they got every answer wrong.
At that point, you've got to think that they're actually so good that they're getting it wrong on purpose. Like Morales in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Like, the only way you can get 0 on this test is to know all of the answers and get it wrong on purpose.
Yeah.
Verbal says, I never recognize people while driving. I just seem to classify everything as dangerous or safe. And I think that again comes back to the context thing that we were just discussing. There can be different contexts which heavily alter the way that we see us. And do you know what? That's probably a really sensible way to drive, because many people are very, very easily distracted, and they see someone and they beep and they look this way and they wave, and you know, you're like, the road's in front of you. What the fuck are you doing? Yeah, I suppose us non-drivers shouldn't really say those things.
I don't know anyone in my area, so I can't get distracted like that.
Just beep and wave at everyone, and then some people are going to
That's
create
what I do.
memory that they don't.
Oh, that's funny though if you do that, because you know what people do. They go, "Wait, who do I know? Who do I know that looks like that?" And then they message the person that they think it was, saying, "Did you beep at me? I could have sworn it was you."
It's crazy though to think that we are as bad as that.
There's another factor as well that makes it even worse, right? So there's this thing called unconscious transference. So it's where, say you get mugged, Joe.
Okay.
And you get a reasonable look at the guy, and he runs off. Yeah, and then you end up like calling the police or whatever. You start walking home because the police aren't going to come out for it for whatever reason. You know, they're like, "Oh, we'll deal with it later because of shit." And then you end up walking home and you see someone else on the walk home, just in passing, right? You might remember that's the person that mugged you, rather than the person who actually mugged
did.
You. Because you've transferred a second piece of information into the first piece of information's place, because it's still in a significant zone, and you've just moved that thing. So sometimes, we might remember somebody saying something or somebody doing something, and actually it was someone else. It's just because of that transfer of information, that unconscious transference, because it's still something important or something like that that's swapped it out. It's within the vicinity of an important moment.
In something like a mugging as well, especially, I imagine that's really quite easy for it to happen, because in that massive high adrenaline moment, your brain's not worrying about cataloguing what somebody's face looks like. And
Precisely.
then later on, when the adrenaline's worn off a bit and your brain's starting to get into that mode of, shit, what did they look like? That kind of situation, I imagine it's really quite likely to happen.
Yeah, and you see this a lot, especially if you have the same race bias as well, and you're white and you see another black person on the way back, or something like that, or you get taken to a lineup and you're like, yes, that's the person. There was a black person that mugged you. You're automatically going to just transplant that person in your head. That's why it's sometimes the like shady cops will just have like a bunch of white people and then have one black person as the only black person, even though they know that the description was a black person, and they'll just put one person in there, and then the person who's making the charge or making a claim that something happened will say, yeah, that's the person.
That's got to be fucking illegal.
It is illegal, yeah, it is illegal, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen, because they're just trying to pin it on someone. A really good film about that whole thing, actually. If Beale Street Could Talk.
If what?
Really? If Beale Street Could Talk.
I don't think I've seen that one. Nice
Never
one.
even heard of it.
Yeah.
It's a really good film about that kind of situation where somebody's falsely identified as a perpetrator of a crime that they didn't commit.
What's
If
the name
Beale
of the
Street-
campaign?
The campaign?
The Innocence Project.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good. That they deal with a lot of people on death row, but they also do other things. But yeah, the Innocence Project, where they're trying to get people who have been put on death row who are innocent, and there's loads of evidence to suggest they're innocent and stuff, but have been. That's where the stat about 75% of wrongful convictions are from eyewitness testimony comes from the Innocence Project. Yeah, it's a good thing to get. They have lots of videos and stuff on their work, and it's shocking how little evidence some people need to convict someone of quite horrible crimes.
Yeah, I suppose there's the worry as well, though. If it's an incredibly horrible crime, you almost want to do everything you can to remove the danger, but you're so focused on removing the danger, you actually don't remove the danger. You just remove something you think is the danger, and it makes you feel better because you feel like, oh, well, the danger's gone.
So this is actually... sorry.
I was just going to say it sort of flips the innocent until proven guilty thing, because you're looking to make sure that somebody who might be guilty doesn't get back out on the street.
That's it, yeah. And this is the thing, like my supervisor, I don't know how far he's moved on this since I was last at uni, but he was working on stuff around introducing a test to give people who make claims, eyewitness claims, about how good their facial recognition is. So if they're saying it's someone, it basically tests how reliable they are as a witness. Because if they're really crap at facial recognition, then they're not going to be a reliable witness, right? If they're really good, they're more reliable. But then it is, the issue is that going to cause more people who are... So it's obviously going to make innocent people less likely to be convicted, right? But is it also going to make it harder to convict people who are actually guilty of the crime?
This is what I was going to raise as well, because we're proving quite well how bad testimony is, how bad facial recognition is. But say this situation where Joe got mugged, if he's the only evidence there is, and he's sure that person 3 in the lineup is the person, what do we do then? Because we can't just throw that out as a justice system. But we also can't rely on it.
Because Joe specifically isn't reliable around faces.
Especially, yeah.
No.
I mean, I don't know how we then address that as a justice system. If
I'd
the
have to get
only-
them to run, to be honest. So I'd get it. So are you allowed to do that in lineups? Because that would I say, like, I need to see them running away from me.
They get. Have you seen The Usual Suspects? They get you to. You can get them to do things. Yeah. Say what's on the card.
It's usually just voice and kind of visual recognition, though, with the
Yeah.
lineup. Not that I have any experience in it or anything.
Get them to start singing Backstreet Boys.
Isn't that a Family Guy one?
No, Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
That's it.
Oh yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, so if it wasn't Joe, say it is somebody who does better than chance on a facial recognition test, there is still a chance that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we go as a justice process in part of the justice system if we recognize that testimony is so inaccurate and facial recognition is so inaccurate? Do we get to a point where we just say, well, no, none of that matters anymore? You have to have ABC proof before we'll even think about charging them.
I mean, I personally think the justice system is set up in a weird way anyway, and it leaves the victims out of the equation entirely, almost. And I think that if there is a situation where it can't be proven one way or the other if somebody is guilty, it seems highly likely that that's the case because this person is adamant, but that's the only evidence we have, so we probably aren't going to get conviction, right?
Yeah.
Any situation like that, I think that the victim's kind of safety and the victim's kind of well-being should be the forefront of that, not the conviction. And that's where we should pour resources into, like counseling, into support networks, into making sure that they have the legal right to prevent that individual from accessing them in the future. And for me, that's how the justice system should work, is because that person feels like they have been offended against, right? There's been a crime committed against them, and they're just left on the sideline whilst the police go off and do their work, and then the person either gets convicted or not, and then afterwards there's nothing, essentially. So that's what I think it should happen, because I think you're right. You're between the rock and a hard place in terms of actual convictions and justice. Let's try and figure out, how do we support the victim in that situation to make sure that they're not re-traumatized by the individual going free.
Steen says the justice system does take some of this into account now and is starting to deal with these issues.
Maybe in Scandinavia.
But way too slow, though.
Scandinavia is notoriously progressive in the justice system department and is a beacon for what we should be aiming for our justice system to be.
It did qualify that after the statement as well. So, yeah.
As bad as you might be implying, because I was mugged a few years ago. I was jumped by 3 people, ended up having a chunk of my face replaced with titanium. And the police then kept me up to date with what was going on. They put me in touch with a counsellor who came round afterwards, and I had the option of seeing them for months if I wanted to. So there is an aspect of that personal care to it, but it's certainly better.
Yeah, I think it's okay. Yeah, I probably was exaggerating. It's not absent entirely, but it's not. And I think it is very much police force specific. So, like, you'll get a different, like, if you were in a different part of the country, then you'll get a different reaction based on the police force. A bit like how NHS trusts are very different, even though they all should be the same, right? So it's kind of but yeah, it's not absent, but it could be much improved, especially for victims of sexual assault and anything like that.
I was just about to say, I think it does depend to a certain degree as well on the severity, because somebody tried to mug me again a couple of years ago, and there was nothing afterwards apart from a phone call saying we caught one of them. But the first time, because I'd been rather significantly injured, I had a counsellor offered to me, and there was a lot of follow-up. And the second time, although it was the same basic attempt at a crime, there was a lot less.
Well, obviously, you'd had that first experience, so the second experience is going to traumatize you again, and they should know that because they should have that information, right? Like that, they don't have any information on the victims. This is the problem. They don't have any information on victims. It's all about offenders, and that's a big issue. Like they should know that this person's had this done some before. Let's make sure that they're fine.
So you'd end up essentially having the same as your medical record, but as a victim of crime.
Victim record. Yeah, maybe not call it a victim record though. But yeah, I think so.
What would you call it?
Probably something like victim of crime record probably sounds better, to be fair.
Call it Steve. I call everything Steve.
Speaking of which, that's one of the names we're going for the daughter.
Nice.
Stevie. We haven't decided yet, but that's one of the ones in the mix.
So I guess though
sorry, go for it, Philip.
No, like I want to salvage, I guess, a bit the argument that sort of eyewitness testimony can be sort of helpful still, right? Like I think it depends on the configuration, because like we know that, for example, that sort of if eyewitness testimony is independent from many people, so that you can stack it, you can stack it, and you can have like a probabilistic calculation even with sort of 0.6 odds that they each got it right? If you have enough of this data set in a specific way, then you could get to a very high degree of probability that it actually was this person. I guess, but like it has to be a very specific setup, right? They cannot communicate with each other, right? There has to be sort of a completely independent account from each person, and then you could have this sort of reasoning in place where you can get very high degrees of confidence. Also, another thing that I wanted to add, which is not really related necessarily to the face recognition stuff, but I think in general, and this surprised me because I was really bad at this as well, is that people generally tend to have very bad reasoning when it comes to inductive reasoning in general, right? Like for instance, I've put out a tweet a couple of weeks back with a sort of I guess poll with an example from an inductive logic book that I was reading, where there is this sort of scenario where there are sort of taxis of different colors, right? A few of them are blue, a few of them are green. There is an eyewitness testimony that says that it was a green taxi or something, but it is like 80% reliable. And people generally tend to discount how much background information matters, because you have this sort of information how many taxis exist in the city, and this sort of sways like the results greatly in terms of what is the most probable outcome, even though this witness is 80% reliable, right? In these circumstances, then it turns out that the opposite of what this witness was reporting is more likely, actually. So the intuitions there are very, very, very bad from people, I think, and the poll showed
to believe the person saying the thing.
Yeah,
right?
so there was a side swiped car, basically, and 80%, 85% of taxis are green, and the rest are blue. And a witness is saying that it is a blue taxi, and this witness was tested and is 80% reliable. Right? Like most people would think, including me, that, if the witness was tested and is 80% reliable, right, 80% of the time it reports the truth, then it's 80%, right? That the probability of it getting right? The probability of her, let's say, reporting the correct color is 80%. So it is probably a blue taxi, but in actuality, it's likely that it is a green taxi, because of the fact that there are many more green taxis than there are blue ones. And so this is sort of a sampling rate thing. And most people got it incorrectly. Like the vast majority only 27% of people got it right, but even then,
Well,
because
so
some people started to post the correct
the
answer.
part of that, though, as well, was that the question, the way it was worded, wasn't exactly clear in itself anyway.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. There was a bit of a...
That kind of leads directly into kind of what we're discussing, where you have a court, right, a courtroom, and you have a jury full of people, and you're told that this eyewitness is adamant that they saw this individual on the night of the thing, right? And then you hear, okay, but they didn't have any kind of the I don't know, gun residue on their hands. They were found on the other side of the town, and all this stuff. There's like you end up having all this information that's stacked against that hypothesis essentially. But they still go, well, you know what? That eyewitness is adamant that it was that person, and then they're convinced by that. Same thing.
Yes, I think like my aim was to show that these sort of things are sort of surprising, and there are many things that intuitively seem correct, which might not actually be that.
Yeah, and this is the thing of like eyewitness testimony isn't as simple as common sense, and that's the thing that all of the studies on eyewitness testimony have shown, and this goes back to the 70s. That it's not as simple as like common sense where we can trust people, and that is it still continues to be used in court, and it's like surely that's something that we need to learn from, because it's shocking how many people are wrongly convicted because of it. It is absolutely shocking.
Yeah,
and other stuff,
and in some respects, though,
friendships.
You sort of need it in court as well. You need it as part of your evidence, but it's a shame it sways the jury. So you need to take the human element out of it. You need a lawyer to read out, this is the eyewitness statement, and that is the information you've got.
And it needs to be the initial statement.
Yes. Yeah.
None of the stuff
that. Yeah, exactly. No, completely agree with you. So you still need the eyewitness testimony. This is what they have reported on the case. There you go. But that is what is read out, rather than badgering the witness and all of that sort of stuff.
I've got a question about this then. Saying about it has to be the initial statement. So we've covered about how we start to fill in parts of the memory and transferring and implanting and stuff like that. But also, is everything where you start to remember something more clearly, implanting and transposing more stuff in, or is there sometimes a case that actually you are properly remembering things better over time? Memories become clearer. Because
that's a good question.
Because if the latter is at least sometimes true, then using the initial statement isn't necessarily going to be the best outcome.
Well, I
might remember. Oh no, yeah, he had green shoes on. I remember now because I saw how it contrasted against the white car.
I suppose if the initial statement is done when you are in an emotive state, there is a big chance that if you haven't had a chance to calm down, sit back, reflect on it, and think of it. So maybe you need the initial statement and the secondary
a few
statement.
days later.
Yeah.
Well, I don't even think you need that. You just need to not do the initial statement immediately after the event, and you need to not have kind of sense made for that person, or ask them questions that might have led them on in a certain direction or whatever before that.
Yeah, I agree with that. But also back to the actual question of why I asked that. Are memories sometimes actually becoming more clear over time? Or do you think it's always a case of false memories and contextualizing and therefore becoming less true?
I think what it is so if we're thinking specifically around a situation where somebody's been offended against, whatever the offense is, could be a mugging, could be a somebody burgling the house or whatever. There's an initial point where you are in a heightened state, like Joe said, and your ability to recall things is quite impaired in those. Like, I'm sure all of us know that when we're more emotional, we can't remember stuff as much. Like when you get into a heated argument, then you cannot remember for the life of you why that argument even started in the first place, because it's your memory's just blocked off. You're like, why are we even arguing? Yeah. So you're in a heightened emotional state, and then as you come down from that, you de-escalate. You begin to be able to remember those things more clearly because you're able to, because your head's a bit clearer. And I think that's probably what it is, and that can take a few days. That's not like if you're in really highly escalated, then that's not going to just happen in a few hours or something. So I think that's probably what it is. But then as that process carries on, you will start to fill in the gaps. So there's probably, like, I would say, and I haven't read the research on this, so this is an educated guess, but I would probably say there's probably like a Goldilocks zone where you can go, that's the perfect time, but it would be very person specific to get the correct information.
Yeah. And
there's I can't imagine there being the resource to be able to analyze that for each individual immediately after an event, right? But that's what I would say is that there's a point where it is the most accurate memory that person can have, and then it starts to become warped by other information that comes in afterwards.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also, as you were saying before, at that heightened moment, you're not always making the memories, and you're transposing more stuff in straight away afterwards.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do you think that it can be possible sort of to have an event trigger actually a better recollection of a memory? Like, say, because this is something that you hear a lot, right? When someone experiences something, you suddenly remember something.
Yes, I mean, think about how your olfactory senses can sometimes...
Smell is one of the best.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you remember something. So you could have an event where something happens and you go, oh my God, that's made me remember this thing as well, because you're in a similar context.
The question is that which you're filling in at that point, is that which you're actually recalling an actual memory, or is it more like sort of a reconstruction that is filled in with a lot of stuff? Like,
I have an answer for this.
Okay.
So there's an interview technique called a cognitive interview. And essentially what they do is they try and get as much information as possible. So they ask you to do very different, they ask you to do it in different ways. So they might ask you to think about the smells that you were there, that were present at the event, right? They might ask you to talk about it backwards, to imagine yourself being there, to what was the air like, to tell you about the environment and stuff like that, get you into a position, because our memory is much better if we're in the same environment that the memory was formed. So, like, for instance, if you're revising for an exam, if you were to revise in the exam hall, you'd do much better on the test than if you were to revise in your bedroom, right?
Not everyone has an episode of House as well.
Oh, do they? Well, it's an actual thing. House is quite good at, I think, being quite accurate in terms of that stuff.
There was an accident on a bus where there's a bus crash, and there was somebody sick who he was with, but he can't remember. He's got retrograde amnesia or whatever they call it from the accident. So he gets in a bus to try and remember things.
Oh, that's cool.
His head in the pile of clothes of all of the passengers while they're in hospital to try and that olfactory memory as well.
Yeah. Sometimes with this cognitive interview, they even take you to the location and ask you the questions in the location. So it's trying to build up the biggest association you possibly can. But what happens is you get way more information than you would do if you had a regular interview. And it includes more accurate details, but you get way more inaccurate details as well.
Oh, really?
So the level of accurate details increases like considerably, but that you also get a lot more inaccurate details. So the amount of information is like tripled or something. I don't know the actual amounts, but it's tripled. But then you have like 20% more accurate details, but then you might have also 20% more inaccurate details. So it's really tough to differentiate what's accurate and what's not accurate from that afterwards. So it does work, but it also like kind of ends up not working at the same time.
I would imagine because you're sort of retrofitting a lot of what you pick up from the environment that you brought in. But like another question that could be asked, I guess, is if the actual things that you do recall correctly, if those are actually not because you're actually recalling something better, but because you're retrofitting those as well, but they just happen to be
Correct.
Correct, because of the environment that you brought into, which is sort of matching the environment in which it happened. So the amount of details increase, but because of the same effect that you're doing, which leads to the wrong things being retrofitted, you also retrofit correct information. Right? That would be an interesting thing to me.
I mean, how would you even be able to tell?
Yeah,
because
no idea, honestly.
the end result would be the same regardless. So how would you actually be able to tell? I mean,
no clue, honestly. It was just a thought that I had that maybe the correct hits and the increase in detail in that is due to the same sort of process that is unreliable.
Yeah,
but yeah, maybe I'm just.
Let me do some more reading into cognitive interview, and I'll be able to tell you how it's progressed recently. Because
that'd be good for a future stream, actually.
It's a really interesting interview technique, and it's got a lot of research behind it, and it does work. But the issue is that it just increases the volume, and you might get more details, but it's then whoever's analyzing that will have to pick it apart and say, well, what is likely and what's not likely to be true from that.
So
that's not always easy.
When this kind of thing's happening, I know that they can use, to some degree, fMRI scans to tell whether you're recalling something or making something up. Does that also apply to false recollections? Or
no, because that's memories again.
It's
so
completely the same as
yeah. And I think I think I've touched on fMRIs before. They're very
on the psychopathy.
Yeah, we did, of course. Yeah, so they're temporarily very sensitive. So over periods of time, they can tell you how the brain is activated in a certain moment, right? But then spatially, they're pretty bad. So even if you get like similar area, so it might be that the hippocampus is activating on the right side of the brain, they won't be able to tell necessarily where in the hippocampus it's firing because it's just not spatially accurate enough because of the way it's done with all these averages, these layers, and people have different kind of
because you get different neural pathways and shortcuts create people. So one person, one thing, like say if I was throwing a punch and you were throwing a punch, because I've trained martial arts for 10 years and trained to be an instructor, it would show up a different pathway in my brain to it would in yours. Or
Precisely.
Else's.
Precisely. But it might be in a similar location, so we'd get like a general vibe of where it is, but yours would be in one place. Or it's tough. I'm not sure, and I'm happy to be proven wrong in the future, but I'm not sure if we're going to ever get a really decent functional brain scan.
I hope we do, but
I hope we do as well. I just think it's kind of, I don't understand how you would do that without it being intrusive.
Well, I mean, that's how we will get it. We'll get it just be incredibly intrusive.
So it's, and obviously I don't know about I think we all go probably a little bit shocked about what the technology of the future will be. But yeah, I can't, and I'm not a neuroscientist as well or an engineer. So but I just can't imagine how we'd do that, because at the moment it's kind of it's done in a very kind of, unless we just increase the size of the magnet,
or just own problems.
Yeah, I can't imagine how we would do it on an individual basis either, like without doing it as averages.
No, yeah, because you have to account for the shortcuts and pathways that have been formed in each brain, don't you?
Exactly, and also you have to cancel out all of the other activity that's going on at the same time, because our brains are very active all the time. So Sorry?
It's only 10%. It's fine.
And I'm just in Laplace's demon again as well, and that's giving me trauma. That's double trauma. Tell that to the directors of Loki.
I'll be right back. I'm on my way to search for free will. It was a great line.
So was there anything else that you wanted to cover off with us tonight?
I think we've covered quite a bit.
I think we have too.
Covered a lot. Yeah, I think like there could be an interesting thing related to this, which is sort of testimony on miracles and Hume and all of that stuff. That seems sort of related, but I don't think we have time for that. Perhaps that's better left for another day.
Well, this is a good setup episode, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
I don't know much about the philosophy of testimony, to be fair, so
yeah.
That'll be interesting to hear how it lines up with what I've said tonight.
Yeah.
We've done a couple of intro streams to it, but nothing too in-depth.
No, it'd be good to come back to it and actually feed off of this and have you back as well when you're free, Luke, and sort of hear the other side of it, but actually be here to go, but what about? No, it'd be good. Cool. Are there any questions in the chat, or do you guys have any questions for Luke before we go?
I'm good.
No, I'm good.
I would like to ask
I learned a
Shannon
lot.
if she's still here, whether I satisfied her need for psychology nerddom.
I think she had to shoot, unfortunately. But yeah.
Well, hopefully she watches it back.
OP missed half the stream. Yeah, you did. But don't worry. You missed a rant about null hypothesis and everything. But dude, I'm glad you made it, and it's nice. Steen came for HO as well. Oh no! So you all missed the null hypothesis.
You got to watch the start of the stream.
Yeah, you got to wind it back. Sorry.
You can still watch it.
Yeah.
As we've been reminded, you can go back and watch it, and you can get all the answers right, even though that wasn't the point of the exercise. The point was to get it wrone.
Which I did well.
You won, Joe.
I've done a thing. I've done the psychology. Awesome. Okay, well, if there's no more questions or anything like that, I guess then we shall wrap things up for tonight. It's been very interesting. Thank you very much, Luke. It's always good when you come on and teach us a little bit about psychology.
Yeah, thank you, Luke.
Yes,
It's my pleasure.
it was really good.
And of course, thank you to Kristen and Philip for joining Dave and myself tonight as well. Always great to have a large crowd here with us, and everybody who's been in the chat room as well. Thank you. I look forward to us covering this off again. I think we've even got next Tuesday an idea of what we were doing. We're doing the rationality thesis, aren't we, Dave?
Yeah.
So
if you've got nothing for next Thursday, we could do the follow-on to this one with the testimony stream.
Oh, are you free? Are you free next Thursday, Luke?
I'll have to check.
Okay.
I'll let you know as soon as I can.
Cool.
No worries.
I think I did have an idea for next Thursday, but I've forgotten. So
I know next week I'm back to D&D, so I shan't be with you.
Ah,
Oh, no.
is that even on Tuesdays as well?
No, but it is Mondays and Thursdays, so I can't really do 3 nights away.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's more than fair. Cool. Okay, then. Well, thank you, everybody, once again. You've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
I'm Luke.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Philip.
And if you don't remember that, don't worry. Neither does 60% of people.
I'm only taking a guess at my name.